sector update in terms of the COVID-19 period. Today, we've got a really good agenda again. We've got some great speakers, and we are talking about recovery. That's, again, based on feedback of members. There was a focus to actually move to more, not actually responding in the initial phase, to now move into the opportunity to how do we come out the other side of that. So we've got Andrew Brick from Red Cross Victoria. So we're looking forward to hearing from Andrew today. Andrew is the Acting State Bushfire Recovery Lead and Drought Recovery Programs Coordinator at Gippsland, Victoria. So welcome, Andrew. We also have Emma King, who's the CEO of VCOS, the peak body for the community sector in Victoria. So it's great to have Emma here with us as well. And I'll do a little presentation as well from a provider perspective in terms of responding and coming out the other end of COVID-19. We've got some time for questions and discussion, and we'll look to finish at 11:30. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Andrew and look forward to hearing what Andrew has to say. Thanks, Andrew.
Excellent. Thanks, Lyndon, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak to you all today. As Lyndon said, my name's Andrew Brick, so I'm the Acting State Bushfire Recovery Lead here in Victoria for Red Cross. Now, no doubt most of you will be aware of just the scale of the fire event that went through Victoria, and in fact most of southeastern Australia over the summer period of 2019-20. And in fact, if we even go back to it, it was started in New South Wales, believe it or not, in July of 2019. So it's been quite an extensive period that we were under emergency conditions and responding to emergencies, and now we're faced with bushfire recovery in some, a very significant part of southeastern Australia, with the COVID-19 overlay on top of that. And even if we take it back another step, we had certainly parts of southeastern Australia in drought conditions for about 7 years. So, so we're talking communities that were really straining under the conditions that they had prior to the fires, and we had those significant fires come through, and now the restrictions that are placed on the whole country, and in fact the whole world, with regards to COVID-19. What I'm going to do today is run through just a very quick training program that we've got, and I've kind of lost exactly what I was looking for here. No, there we go. It's called Recovery Basics. Now, this is something that we go and deliver to all our recovery officers who are working in these areas, plus also the community members, those informal and formal community leaders who actually work with communities as they're going through recovery. I'll start just with this little quote here from Anne Leadbeater. Now, Anne was a survivor of the Black Saturday bushfires that went through parts of Victoria back in 2009, and does a lot of work with Red Cross now in relation to bushfire and, in fact, recovery from any natural disaster. And this quote here that's on your screen now, that I hope you can all see: being recovered is able to live a life you have reason to value. The real meaning of that quote will probably become a bit more apparent later on as we talk about different types of stress and how people react.
Andrew, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I can't see your screen. It looks like there's a firewall that you need to...
Does there? Okay then, let me have another go at it, because it did, hang on, there we go. I'll try that one there first. Can you see Zoom come up on the screen there?
Yes.
What have you got now? Does it say, is the PowerPoint presentation there now?
No.
Oh dear. Okay then I might have to, if I can't get this sorted very quickly. It was up before, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
It's that old chestnut, isn't it? Okie dokie, let's get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. So can you just see the desktop there now?
Yeah, that's right.
And so you still can't see anything?
No.
Oh dear. All right then. Let's crack on anyway. So being recovered is able to live a life you have reason to value is a quote attributed to Anne Leadbeater, as I just mentioned. I think the term recovery, though, can be a bit of a misnomer because at times, particularly when we're talking disaster recovery, so from natural disasters, it's things won't ever really go back to how they were prior to it. A fire comes through, the landscape is severely burnt. It's just not going to be the same as it was. And like with COVID, and perhaps even drought as well, that are going to be longer term economic recoveries, we're going to find that life won't be exactly how it was. We're going to have these social distancing, physical distancing measures in place for quite some time yet, because we just don't know how long this virus will in fact last for, and when we're going to get some sort of vaccine. With recovery and perhaps even a renewal process, if you like. Most organisations now, and Red Cross in particular, we place people at the centre of all of our models for recovery. We have different pillars of recovery that are worked through as we're going through rebuilding communities post events. They are we have people at the middle, and we have a built environment. So natural enough, if it's a flood or a fire or cyclone, we do have infrastructure damage, also damage to the natural environment and the surrounds. But the main ones that we're looking at, particularly with COVID, the recovery for people, so social recovery and economic recovery, which is going to be extremely complex and quite detailed over the coming years. I've got another little quote here. This is from a survivor of the 1983 Ash Wednesday fires, and this probably really sums up why we put people at the middle of recovery. We want to make it a community-led recovery. So no one can take away our right to make our own decisions or to interfere with those we have made. We don't need everything done for us, as we are neither useless nor helpless. We want to help ourselves and play a part in helping the community. All we need is a bit of a hand to kick us off and some support along the way, a chance to tell you our problems before you come up with your solutions. That quote, as I said, from the Ash Wednesday, survivor of the Ash Wednesday fires, is really aimed at looking at the bureaucracy of how communities are rebuilt, and making sure that the community are in fact consulted along the way, and they are the ones that are driving this recovery. With something as large as COVID, it's going to be very difficult for communities to have that sort of input as to how they're going to rebuild their economic viability after such a significant event as COVID. Because a lot of that is driven by the government anyway. This is really about how to physically rebuild communities and the sorts of things that we want, that we want communities to do to assist themselves in rebuilding. Recovery is a long-term event. We have effectively two different sorts of disasters. So we have a rapid onset disaster, so like a fire and potentially even a flood, even though they can be kind of slow moving. We still have a rain event or some sort of event that leads to that flood. Or you have those long onset ones where we don't really know that they have a start date or particularly even an end date sometimes, and that's like drought and kind of like this COVID. In the first instance though, we provide relief. So response agencies will look at providing relief to communities. In the case of COVID, particularly here in Victoria, we had the Red Cross with their partners at food bank, delivering packages of emergency food supplies to people who had to self-isolate, whether that was through a diagnosis or they were at risk or couldn't get out to shops to go and buy their own food. But that only lasts for a certain period of time, and generally a very short period of time. Once that relief aspect has finished, we start moving into what we call early recovery, and that's just looking at how people can start getting back on their feet quickly enough to be able to do some of the basic day-to-day needs that they might have. Then you have longer term recovery, and that's where it's really ongoing community work. For instance, with the fires, and I'm sitting out here in Bairnsdale at the moment, we have several community recovery committees between sort of Bairnsdale and Mallacoota. They are looking at how communities can be rebuilt. They're holding discussions with their own communities, and then advocating to local government and further up the chain to assist in their actual recovery and rebuilding. There are sort of 5 general ways that people might react to a disaster and the way they go through their recovery process. A couple in particular that are at the higher end, you find some people that might be resistant to the disaster, and so they just keep going along as though nothing had happened. They seem to be able to cope with it really well, but just it's almost like water off a duck's back. They just keep moving on. Some people will actually grow from it, so the event will happen, and they're I suppose perhaps some of those informal leaders that might step up during that time, and they really get a great sense of community pride and able to work through and actually function at a higher level because of what happened, and they grow within themselves. More commonly, you're going to have people will build their resilience over it, and they become a really resilient sort of person. They will take a dip in the first weeks or days or months after an event, but then slowly, as time goes on, they will get back to a normal so-called sense of living as to how they were prior to the event happening. The 2 areas, though, that Red Cross are really work hard to try and look after as we go through these recovery events, are people who might have a delayed reaction. So they could be going through for many months or even years after an event, and it's not until perhaps 2 or 3 years down the track where something small triggers a memory, like a post-traumatic stress, and they really fall off. And it's at that time where, because it's so long after an event, the people who are resistant, or even the people who are resilient, they've come back from their low point, start to question why people are all of a sudden falling off. This comes into a lot of that social and psychosocial welfare of communities that we look at. The most concerning one, though, is the people who have that a really chronic reaction to a disaster. So, like the resilient people, they will have a dip in their emotions. They will really, I suppose, fall off in the first couple of days or weeks after an event, but they can never seem to really get themselves back out of that that mire, if you like. It's really just a feeling of down all the time, and they just can't get back to how they were before. This is a really concerning group, and certainly a group that Red Cross and all of the social welfare organisations that are in the communities are really looking out for and try to assist as much as we can. It's a difficult task to identify who is affected by disasters, and even when they're affected. it's not necessarily just people who are in, say, the direct line of the fire that might be affected. It can be, people who perhaps holidayed in that particular place or have a very strong social connection, who maybe not there at the time, but they can certainly feel well affected by it. I heard a story post the Lindt siege, the Lindt Cafe siege in Sydney a few years back, where there was a young girl who wanted to become in New South Wales, wanted to become a solicitor. And she was going through university, I think it was up in Newcastle. She had her heart set on working in that particular area of Sydney, and all she wanted to do was get a job in one of the firms down there near Martin Place and go across to the Lindt Cafe every day for a coffee. That was her dream. Yet, when the Lindt siege happened, that sort of that wrecked her dream, that wrecked her direction that she had in life. And her and her mum came down to place flowers down there, and she was quite visibly upset. And some Red Cross people that were there had a chat to her and had this story explained. And so it just shows that it's not necessarily a person who has to be there that can be affected by it. One of the things that we try to really be mindful of when we're talking about recovery, and certainly people who have been in those areas when a disaster happens, is the language. So often we try to take the word victim out. Someone's not a victim of a disaster unless they unfortunately deceased. We try to use the term survivor. Make it a positive outcome. I guess in much the same way that we say that there are survivors of breast cancer or survivors of domestic violence, as opposed to the word victim, because it sort of has that connotation of a sense of loss, where we want to make them more positive. Mental health is a huge part of recovery. We know that there's significant amounts of mental health or mental health issues in society as a norm. However, after some of these larger scale emergencies, we do find that it does increase significantly. A mild or moderate mental disorder, like a moderate or mild depression or anxiety, it can increase up to 20% post a large emergency. Same with moderate or severe psychological or social distress. So, which might not be a formal disorder, but we know that there is large percentage increases in people who are displaying these sorts of behaviours and tendencies post a large event. Again, this is why social recovery is so important as we're going through the whole recovery process. As I mentioned before, that that communication and language is a huge part of recovery for us, and particularly as I guess in that transport industry, and especially when you're talking about perhaps patient transport and other public transport forms. The words, the language, and even your voice and your body language are really important as we're going through dealing with people's emotions as they're coming out of these large scale emergency events, and even with COVID as well. With your language, you need to keep it at times fairly succinct, on message, and just to the facts. It's just got to be information, no surmising or trying to guess how people are feeling or guessing what might have happened. It's just stick to the facts. Same with your voice, keeping your tone very neutral. We know that at times people can get angry, and people might get angry at you, and it's important to remember that it's not a reflection on you. It's more an indication of that of their headspace, where they are actually at the moment. And so when we're talking to people, we need to make sure that we're just keeping a nice steady tone, nice volume, not trying to rush through our messages. Same with body language, using that facial expressions and gesturing, making sure that they are positive, and we're really practicing that active listening, because sometimes people just need to talk, and if we let them talk, they'll just keep talking and talking. And while it might be a case, it may just very much be a case of just listening and continuing to listen while they get something off their chest. And just by sitting there and nodding and perhaps giving the odd word of encouragement, it really helps them formulate the thoughts in their own mind, and they can walk away, even if you've only said half a dozen words, they walk away feeling a whole lot better. We've got 3 basic rules for recovery communications. Is it relevant? Is it clear? And is it targeted? Now, this is, I guess, more attuned to how we as recovery officers would be approaching either talking to people in the community, talking to large groups, and that sort of thing. Anna Bligh was really good in the floods up in Brisbane a couple of years ago. Well, actually, it was a few years ago now, wasn't it? 2011. And this was basically out of the 9/11. The 9/11 disaster in New York, even earlier than that. She basically came up with every press conference was 4 things, just to make it really relevant and clear to all of the community. Number 1, they were saying what they were doing. Number 2 was saying what they knew had happened. Number 3 was what they didn't know. And number 4 was what they wanted the community to do. Make it really relevant, clear, and so that people can actually understand and process exactly what's going on, so they knew exactly what to do. That's the same for recovery as well. We just need to make things absolutely clear. Sometimes it might not even be verbal communication. It could be pictures. There's a story from Black Saturday where there was a fella from Telstra in one of the recovery centres, one of the relief centres, sorry. He was had all these brochures about mobile phones and getting people reconnected, and people were just wandering around in a daze almost because of what happened. And he couldn't understand why people weren't coming up to him and asking about telephones, because everyone's saying that they couldn't get any communications out. They couldn't talk to anyone. So he went and drew a picture of a phone and held it above his head. And because people could see just that picture, they, rather than having to try and understand the words or trying to process the words, they could see a picture, very easy, very clear for them to understand. And he was able to help out quite a lot. As I mentioned, active listening. It's a really good way of showing that person that that you're talking with, that you are understanding, and that the focus is on them. Of course, we listen without judgment. As I said before, if someone wants to just tell you their life story, and at times, if we're, say it's a patient transport driver, and we're just you're driving them off to their medical appointment or home from a medical appointment, just have a listen to them. It can be really, really therapeutic for that person. I will also probably touch on very briefly at the moment, because I know that time's a bit tight today, but vicarious trauma is very real for recovery workers. So it's important that you're not trying to take on all of those problems, all of those issues that you're listening to people tell you. You need to try and find that time yourself to be able to really pull back, take some recovery time, and really just try and switch off from your job so that you can have some really good relaxation time and time to process what you've heard, and certainly reach out if you do need some assistance. The full recovery basics course, and in fact there's another course that we run called Supporting the Supporters, goes a lot further into that self-care and well-being. Again, dealing with distressed people, it's that bit about staying calm, and being polite, but really not trying to take it personally. I mentioned earlier about the person who might be angry and displaying some of those real potentially offensive or hopefully not aggressive body language and even verbal language to you. It's not that it's a reflection on you. It's just a reflection on where they're at the moment. It might be that they've suffered a really stressful time, and that's how they can. That's how they're just getting their release. It's not an affront on you. It's just that how they are at the moment. Speaking of stress, we've got the body has or produces two hormones when it's under stress. One is adrenaline, which is that acute stress. So for instance, Mick Fanning, he's out at the surfing competition, I think off Cape Town, it might have been in South Africa, and as the great white shark come up very, very close to him, he has to give it a whack on the nose and then swim quite literally for his life back to the shore. He gets out of the water at the other end. They're interviewing him about it. His eyes are darting around. He can't really answer any question properly because he's just so worked up. It's that flight or fight hormone, adrenaline. Cortisol, though, is the protracted stress, and that's the one that we're really concerned about with long-term recovery, and that's where the people who have that chronic reaction to a disaster really are mired in that cortisol hormone. Some people have likened it to trying to walk through honey. It's just very, very difficult. You just want to do one day at a time. You get really sort of preoccupied with perhaps some of the little things and can't quite see the bigger picture. At times it can be very difficult to focus. You get low energy, feel quite dull, just feel as though everything is coming at you all at once. It's one of those ones that, or cortisol is that really depressive hormone. It blocks your ability to, I guess, see happiness at times. It can give that feeling of despair. You feel defeated or overwhelmed about all of the things that are going on. I suppose the saying is, you can't see the forest for the trees. It makes it very difficult to actually go through life and looking at longer term goals. It's just about looking at what's happening, in the next day or potentially even in the next hour. That prolonged cortisol stress can lead to headaches, sleep disturbances, decreased immunity, which at this time with COVID can be very dangerous to us. Leads to different signs of stress, whether it's rashes or acne, high blood pressure, leads you prone to potentially prone to a heart attack or stomach ulcers. Can increase but also decrease appetite. Very different. Very different way of a very different way of living. It's not a really healthy way of living. My background prior to joining Red Cross was with Victoria Police, 23 years as a police officer. looking at some of the stuff, certainly within this package and some of the other ones that we deliver, I can definitely recognise in myself and my colleagues some of these signs of that cortisol stress, and it makes that self-care and really that well-being, looking after yourself, just so much more important. I've probably got about pretty close to the time now, and this has really been just the crash course in recovery and what it can do to a person and how we go about some of that psychosocial recovery. I might, Suzanne or Lyndon, just open it up if there are any questions that anyone might have in relation to it. I'm certainly happy to take some questions offline. I'm sure, Suzanne, you'll be able to circulate my email and phone number. And likewise, there are other courses that supporting the supporters course that can be delivered by Red Cross in relation to that self-care and well-being, and goes into, I suppose, a bit more detail about some of those aspects of recovery and most definitely the self-care and well-being aspect.
Yes, fantastic. We'll share your details. Just to tell everyone that Andrew will be jumping off the call very shortly. So if you do have any questions you'd like to ask now, please put them in the chat or the Q&A right now. Otherwise, I think there's one there now. Can you see that, Andrew? Or
I can.
Great.
Can cortisol be measured in a blood test? There's from an anonymous attendee. I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I didn't do sort of medicine while I was going through policing, so I can't. I can't quite answer that. But being a hormone, I would imagine that it would that there would be some sort of blood test for it. Cortisol is really, I guess, apart from being that hormone that does flow through you, is really displayed through some of those actions and that feeling. It can be, I guess, as little as some lethargy, but also manifest itself in some of those potentially eating disorders, skin rashes, that sort of thing. But I'd imagine it would be able to be tested in a blood test, but we'd probably have to go to Dorevitch Pathology to find out that one.
Lovely, thanks, Andrew. And look, again, if there's any other questions, please send them through. We can handle those questions if they come up pretty much immediately. Otherwise, Andrew has kindly offered to answer those offline, so we appreciate with that offer, Andrew. And look, I just want to say too, I found that presentation really informative. I think, I guess from from a service provider's perspective, that we are really focused, I guess, on delivering services, delivering transport, etc., etc. But it's important, I think, to get that high level view of response recovery framework in particular. And I think thinking about the sector with lots of staff, yes, but most importantly, a lot of us have lots of volunteers, and it's thinking about, I guess, how they each might, in their own journey, how they experience this issue and how they re-engage back in the business. And of course, that's the same with consumers as well. So I think really enjoyed the framework. I think the language part was really great around trying to keep that very simple and very clear and very honest. And also the awareness, I guess, of how people are dealing with the situation. So again, just want to thank you very much for your presentation. Excellent, thank you.
And thanks, Lyndon. Thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from from people as we go along. So, but as I said, I'm happy to take any questions offline and certainly have a discussion if you want to have the broader presentation, if you like. It's so much easier doing it in person rather than just speaking to a laptop. But it's thanks for the opportunity.
And I can vouch. We did have a little glimpse of the presentation. The IT was working. It was very, very good. So if that means anything, but I'm sure that can be forwarded in due course. So again, thanks, Andrew. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lyndon.
Now we have Emma King, who's the CEO of VCOS, obviously the peak body for community services in Victoria. And I know from the work that TASCOS here in Tasmania are doing a great job, and I understand the same's happening in Victoria with VCOS. So they're playing a very important role at the moment in leading the sector, I guess, into, through, and out of this from a peak bodies perspective across the sector. So it's great to have Emma here. So welcome, Emma. Look forward to having a chat with you and hearing what you've got to say on behalf of VCOS. So welcome.
Thank you, Lyndon, for your very kind words, and a huge thanks to you and Suzanne for inviting me. And I do apologise that I wasn't able to be in from the beginning. I was very hopeful that life would work out so that I could be. Can I also begin by acknowledging that while we're all meeting on the lands of many different traditional owners, if I can acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I thought what might be useful today is just to give a broader high-level overview, as you mentioned, with our beautiful sister organisation, TASCOS, whom we work actually especially closely with, being held in very safe hands by Nick McBride and a few of her colleagues. We're waiting for the new CEO to come in there. Just a couple of observations to begin with. So in terms of looking at the broader COVID-19, the sort of the during process, and I guess, and where we go to, and one of the things that we keep talking about as I think are all being quite rightly encouraged to look at what does a recovery look like, and what are some of the things that are part of that, is we are very mindful, as I suspect you all are, is that what we're in is it's a marathon. It is not a sprint. So I know it feels like I was reading some board papers of ours for our last board meeting, and it felt like it was about 2 years ago, but it was only like 6 weeks when I think of all of the things that have happened within a really short space of time. So we're all strapping ourselves in here for the long haul. I think many of you are probably fully across the role of VCOS. I'll just touch on it very, very quickly because I know I've just got 10 minutes. But in terms of looking at basically, as the organisation that works to eliminate poverty and disadvantage, we've got numerous members that come from all sections of the broader community sector that share the same goals around eliminating poverty and disadvantage. And one of the beautiful parts of the role we get to play, although ideally it wouldn't exist because there wouldn't be poverty and disadvantage, is we get to join the dots so that we know, for example, departments might silo things out, be it transport, be it education, be it health, etc. Clearly they are all interconnected in people's lives. You don't say, well, I'm dealing with this issue and it's one thing. They're always interconnected. So that's core at the work that we do as well. One of the, and just some of the roles that we've played during this as well is very much about being that core source. We've seen our role as being about the core source of kind of information, a bit of a one-stop shop, and also around collaboration. So looking at how we bring people together, whether we have the information ourselves or we can refer others to it, and that core role about collaboration as well. We do have a staff member who now sits on the State Relief and Recovery Committee as one of the few community sector organisations who does that. That's a new role for us that started since the beginning of COVID-19. And if it's of interest to people, I can speak more about some of the other groups we're on. I guess one of the overarching pieces for us has been looking at the shift in, when I say shift in narrative and shift in practice, I think one of the things that became very apparent much more broadly, we would have all known this, I suspect already, is that when we look at the safety net that exists for Australians when they hit times of crisis, when they lose their job, when they become sick and they don't have enough money, those sorts of things, it was found to be very threadbare. So we've known that for years. We haven't seen an increase in job, what was Newstart, for 25 years. We hit this crisis and suddenly we see people lining up at 4:30 in the morning outside Centrelink because suddenly they're impacted. And when we hit the last federal election, neither party was actually committing to an increase in Newstart, even though it hadn't been increased for 25 years. There was sort of this assumption, I think, about it won't happen to me. One of the interesting things we've observed during this time is that going from that very threadbare safety net that existed where lots and lots of people were falling through the gaps, we've seen it being knitted together much more tightly. And that is notwithstanding the fact that there continue to be gaps. For example, if you look at people who are on temporary protection visas or, casuals who aren't picked up through job keeper, etc. It's been really interesting looking at that knitting together and the changing of language. So we've moved from the kind of the lifters and the leaners. I still think there's a bit of the deserving and the undeserving in terms of looking at who's falling through the gap still. But nonetheless, it's been interesting. We've seen that doubling in the rate of what's now called job seeker rather than Newstart. Now, to be candid, I don't think any of us saw that coming. In terms of saying, well, actually, we need to double it. I know it's there for 6 months. Part of our challenge is going to be, how do we keep that there? Because we're seeing people who were living in abject poverty who suddenly had when I say their income, it's not exactly a fortune, but the reality is it's a difference between actually having a roof over your head or not having a roof over your head. I read an article this morning about a single mum saying, well, I can now put petrol in the car. It's those kinds of things that people shouldn't really have to choose between, but now they can. So I guess for us, it's looking at, there's a range of different things that we're focusing on. Some of the things that we're seeing right now, which I'm sure you're all seeing as well, are things like the increased call on things like food relief, the impact. And I guess I draw that as a particular example because we know there are particular issues attached to that as well. We know that there's the donations for food relief have dropped, and at the same time, there's been a significant impact on volunteers. And I thought it was particularly useful to probably mention that here, given that we know that there's a number of people who would like to volunteer, but they can't because they're in a high risk group. And we've been told to stay at home, and it's safe to stay at home. And even as we're sort of coming out of that process, we're seeing a very strong trend more broadly about the impact on volunteers, because for a number of people who volunteered, for example, those in the over 70 age group, that they're not able to do that at the moment unless they're putting themselves at serious risk as well. Some of the key things, just to kind of flip from, I could speak at length around some of the, some of the issues we're seeing. I suspect many of you know it as well. We're seeing people coming to services who've never needed the services that our members offer before, about a 25%, at least a 25% increase across the board. For some organisations, it's higher. But most of our members are saying we are seeing people turning up who never needed our services before. Very different. I heard a policeman said to me this morning, look, I'm happy now we're getting out the Melways in equivalent, because we're looking at streets that we've never had to go to before in terms of giving people help. Whole lots of new people coming in needing help, or family violence notices, those kinds of things. In terms of looking obviously around issues around education and engagement and disengagement, I think that will be interesting to monitor now that kids are going back to school, noting that's at a different place in different states, knowing as well that we see family violence. At the moment, notifications generally are down, particularly phone notifications are down, web notifications are up. All of the international trends would suggest that as we get through this process, actually we're going to see those notifications go up significantly. It's pretty hard to report if you're all home together and you can't actually find a way where you can get the space, obviously, to report. Some of the things on the flip side that we're looking to beyond, I've touched those very briefly, but I'm mindful of time. So I just wanted to pick up a few things that I think are significant opportunities for all of us as we come out of this. One of the interesting things out of a crisis that clearly none of us would want to be in is some of the things that have happened and probably taken us a bit by surprise. Some really strong partnerships have developed, certainly between ourselves and different departments, some of which already existed, but some new ones that new people that we didn't work with before, who are coming saying, look, we've seen you doing this particular work with DHHS. We actually really want to emulate that. And can you do that work with us as well? Because it enables us to get to a broad section of the population quickly, and that genuine kind of partnership work. And there's, to be frank, people just have to leave their egos behind and get on and do stuff in a way where we normally just get caught up a bit in bureaucracy. And the Working for Victoria Fund has been a really interesting example of that, where we're just there to get people into jobs. It's really straightforward. We want people into 6-month jobs. We're working with Trades Hall in the department, and we're just making it happen. And at the moment, the program, as someone said to us the other day, we've smashed every KPI. The program, I think the call on it will be kind of full, but we're still looking through how we navigate that. I did want to draw on the example of telehealth, I just think it's a really interesting example of, I've read a number of times, telehealth was intended to roll out over a 10-year time frame, and instead it rolled out over a 10-day time frame. And I think it points to some of the things of what can happen over a crisis that we would not have seen possible in normal times. So for me, a lot of our thinking is going to, what do we do during this time, but maybe what's possible that we wouldn't have thought was possible. So I think telehealth is a really good example. My understanding is some of the doctors were not overly keen on it rolling out particularly quickly. For any of us who've used it during that time, I'm not pretending it's a panacea, but it's been pretty amazing. And it's not a substitute for face-to-face, but gee, it's extraordinary. So I think there's other examples that are there. Another example that we're seeing is in terms of looking at the social housing space. So we know that every single social housing property that may exist is obviously another individual, couple, family who are no longer homeless and highly vulnerable. I think that we are, I'm now being asked different questions. We've been advocating for 6,000 new properties a year for 10 years just to catch up to the national average in Victoria. We're now being asked by the Building Recovery Task Force, there's so many new committees, I might be getting the name wrong. Why are we only asking for 6,000 properties a year when before we were told that we were dreaming? So I just think it's really interesting for all of us about what are some of the things that we see coming out of this crisis, and where might there be opportunities that perhaps there weren't before, but in the absence of, there's no room for bureaucracy kind of holding things back. Sometimes we just have to make stuff happen. So I think that's kind of interesting. So I guess I just wanted to flag that as well. We're deeply interested in what does some of the things look like in the recovery? How do we how do we get the data around who's fallen through the gaps? How do we put protections and safeguards in place? I know I'm the chair of a local neighbourhood house. We know that there are people that we're losing because they don't have internet access. They don't have an email address. They want face-to-face contact. They're not going to pick up the phone. They're not comfortable in picking up the phone, but they'll come in and they'll make coffees for people, for example, all day. We're really worried about losing those people because they can't have that face-to-face contact, or they're just starting to at the moment. And the staff at the service are actively sort of finding them to bring them back in. So we're really worried about what that means. And I think there's a risk around people getting lost. And often it's the more grassroots organisations that have that really close contact, that are really trusted. And that's going to be a really important role in recovery as well, around, how do we find people that we've worked really hard to support over time, that we know with that kind of level of connection, they've got a place of belonging and are doing pretty well. So I just wanted to flag that. And I know I'm full of time, and I know you've got someone else speaking as well. So perhaps it was a very quick overview, but I might leave it there for a potted overview is what I would call it.
Thanks, Emma. And I think you have jammed a lot in, and we do apologise because I think myself, speaking on behalf of myself and others, of course, would love to have heard a lot more. And I guess the VicTas Community Transport peak body does see a really great opportunity. You've talked about innovative partnerships as a result of this, and we see that, I think, with you guys, I think, because transport's something that has been quite, and as a sector, we have to take some responsibility for that. It has been something that has been quite quiet and in the shadows, but it is a massive enabler for a whole range of things. And we know from hearing from what you've just said that the impact on our consumers will be great, and also on their families and the other supports around them. So it's a time where we have to use this for our, for our own advocacy strategies to maximise the opportunity. So, look, appreciate the update and thanks for speaking. It's been very informative and quite broad, so appreciate that in the limited time. So if you have any questions, look, please send them through. I don't think we have any at the moment, but we can always, as we always do, questions that come later, we can send them through, and the speakers have always offered to answer those, and we can respond back to members in due course. So again, thanks very much, Emma. Really appreciate coming on board and having a chat to the team today.
Thank you. And if I can just say a huge thanks to everyone on the line as well, because it goes to the really critical work that you do, where everyone I was just chatting about in terms of the neighbourhood house, who all those people are, because that's the work that you do in the community. And as you said, that essential service that you run, it's just so vital. So I just really want to acknowledge that as well. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Emma. And we do have another speaker, and it is me. So I won't go into too much detail. I won't talk for too long. We have only a short amount of time, but I've only got a brief update. And really, I guess it's just coming from my service provider hat today. And like Andrew, I had a fantastic presentation that for some reason we can't get up and going, but luckily I have printed out some copies, and I am going to just occasionally put it up on the screen, old school PowerPoint, and see if that actually helps at all. But I guess really what I want to talk about is, as a service provider, how we are actually, we've talked about responding to the crisis. We've talked about what we've had to do to contract the service, to slow it right down, to make it safe. And of course that's meant staff working from home, it's meant volunteers standing down, it's meant physical distance in vehicles, and it's meant a service delivery pivot to doing a whole range of different things. And of course with all that, as we heard from Andrew, is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change, and there's a lot of fatigue. So I guess I just want to put that out there. From CTST's perspective, what we've really focused on as part of the recovery is really about two clear things. And the method has been to keep things very, very simple, because there's so much information internal and external around this situation. But in reality, what are people going to remember? So we've had a focus of saying at all our meetings, yeah, okay, let's boil it down. What's the no more than 3 things that we're going to communicate? What are the most important things? Because it is a new environment, and things pre-COVID were important. They still are, but not as important as keeping people safe in terms of infection control. So we developed a COVID safe plan, which of course we all need to. If we haven't, start developing those COVID safe plans for our workplace and of course our service delivery environment. And the other's been about developing a roadmap for bringing staff back to work with consideration given to business continuity. So will we always, will you have all your staff back at work at one time? That's an interesting thing to think about. It's about how do you reintegrate volunteers back into the service, particularly thinking about those in the cohorts of the 70 plus and the others defined as vulnerable by public health. It's then about consumers. How do you re-engage consumers and bring them back into a service environment that keeps them absolutely safe? And of course, keeping everybody safe throughout that process. So just quickly, we've developed, our organisation has used the, as you can see there, the Tasmanian Government's Roadmap to Recovery. So we've aligned our roadmap to the state government's key dates. So keeping things very, very simple. And those really relate to about bringing staff back. So we've got this roadmap for staff that, as you can see there, that lines up with the key dates from the state government. It's about saying, look, from the 18th of May, what the organisation was developing is the COVID safe plan, and what does that actually look like? It's the 15th of June, we will, again, subject to public health, we will work with staff to bring them back to work if they wish to do so. That's working from the 15th of June up to the 13th of July. So again, working with staff, if they wish to come back to work, we will do that. The 13th of July is a date we're saying, again, assuming nothing changes, everything goes to plan, that we have the capacity to have all our staff at work safely. The 15th of June date also is a date we will review the volunteers. So we're saying to the volunteers, we are going to review that date as well in terms of coming back. We've also got a very clear one-pager that says, as a staff member, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure you've got a safe workplace, but importantly, what are the things that you're going to do? So you're going to tell us that if you're unwell or if you've come in contact with someone that may be unwell, you're going to keep your distancing at work. You're only going to touch your own keyboard, and you're going to get the flu shot. They're things that are really, really important. So we've done that. The same with drivers, pretty much the same document that is slightly different. It talks about, again, what as an organisation, what are we going to do to keep you safe? And again, what are you going to do to keep our consumers safe and our staff safe, and of course the other drivers safe as well. So that's been, I guess, a real key focus. We've also developed what we think a very simple one-pager that goes in all the vehicles that says, and this is based straight from the Department of Health and Human Services in Tasmania's guide to vehicle hygiene. And it's really about, the time of collecting keys. It talks about the start of a drive, what you need to do between consumers, how you, a soft clean when refueling. It has a process around what to do when refueling. Of course, how to offer passengers, hand sanitizer, etc. And at the end of the day, what does that clean look like? Importantly too, we've developed a process for what happens if someone in the vehicle, because it's okay to do an assessment and assess a consumer's safe or no risk of COVID when they make the booking and when they confirm the booking. What happens in the vehicle if they become unwell on a long journey? What do you do there? So we've developed, again, a one-pager there that talks about, as you can see there, what actually happens if someone does become unwell. So we've developed in the vehicles a pack, like a first aid pack, that has face masks, gloves, etc., to be able to, I guess, isolate the risk and put the face mask on the person that does become unwell, and then offering it to the others in the vehicle, if there are others in the vehicle, not only the driver as well. So there's a process around that as well, and importantly, those incidents are recorded. I guess it's part of the COVID safe plan is making sure that we are in a new environment. So what's the new asbestos? What's the new, and one of the things we're talking about at work a lot is that, I remember, going when I was at school, all of a sudden they put up in the technical part of the building, the woodwork in the middle, they put up these signs with earmuffs. And we found out, didn't we, that if you listen to really high, noise for a long time, it may have an impact on your hearing. Well, but how do you actually put that? What's the earmuff sign, I guess, for COVID? And so it's about identifying what are some of those issues. So we've also developed a for consumers as well, as you can see there. And that's about service delivery as well. That's basically saying again that it lines up with the state government's roadmap that where businesses are open, we will provide transport for you. But as far as group transport goes, we'll be reviewing that at the June and the July milestone. Also, it's about what will consumers do as well? So what are they going to do to keep themselves safe in the vehicle and to obviously keep other passengers safe and volunteers and staff as well? So essentially that's what we've been doing as an organisation, and I'm sure that it's the same for all organisations. I'm happy to take any questions from the floor. Conscious of the time. But
there's one question in the Q&A. Can you see that?
Yeah. So, Lyndon, are you limiting the length of time of a client trip within your cars and buses, nothing longer than 2 hours? Well, look, we're not, because again, we're concentrating on the controls. So again, it's really focused on the assessment of a consumer when they hop in the vehicle. It's having, the ability to actually, if someone does become unwell, manage that risk. So particularly in Tassie, we've got lots of the trips that we do are over 2 hours. So we bring people from the northwest of the state to Hobart. Some of those trips are 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours. So we're following the advice. If someone needs to go get groceries and they want to travel 2 hours, we'll be saying to them, well, look, we can deliver that transport for you in a shorter period of time. So we would apply that method. Another question there: are you looking to refit transport cars with clear screens like we're seeing in retail outlets? Very good question. We are discussing it. We are again focused on, I guess where we're different, we believe, is that we control who goes in the vehicle. We control that by, I guess, as opposed to a retail outlet, you can't control who comes in unless you have that assessment at the front door. So we think our strengths are in the actual assessment of a consumer, giving them all the education they need about services with our organisation, receiving services. Again, that's where the focus has been, but it is something that we are looking at. It's on the agenda always, but we haven't gone down that track as yet. So I'm just conscious of time, and look, I did rush through that very quickly, but I guess happy to share documents, etc. In due course. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure we're all across these concerns, but the focus really has been for us around developing that COVID safe plan and using the principles as defined by National Cabinet and Workplace Safe Australia. The engagement of consumers and staff is really, really important around, do they feel safe with these controls in place? Monitoring incidents and hazards, and if you're not getting any, I guess, hazards or hazard identification rather around social distancing, then are people reporting that as a hazard or an incident? So I think it's really monitoring those things now and evaluating your controls. So another question there, your info sheets are great. Do you think that Uber and taxis will be as thorough as CGST? Look, generally speaking, I'd hope not. I'd like to think that our controls and the sector's controls are far stronger than the open market. I would hope to think so. So I'd hope not. I think there may be providers. I know as an organisation we sometimes do this where we have a breakdown or a late or an issue with the run sheet. We will engage a taxi. Very limited numbers, but we've got agreements and subcontractor agreements in place with them that have COVID specific plans that link into our own policy, procedure and system that we monitor. So I would hope to think that they would, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't, because I'd like to think that we as a sector have a very more robust safety precaution than the taxi, given that our consumers are vulnerable. I think I've answered that question. Okay, so look, I guess finally, it's for us. It's really been about, you know, as a driver, there's so much stuff drivers need to think about and do. What don't they need to think about and do anymore? And what are the new things they need to think about and do? And what are the things that are valued as an organisation and that are important? And making sure they really understand that and the training's provided. And that's been a real focus, trying to keep the communication very simple with pictures and with limited literature as possible. Does anyone do domestic assistance? We don't, but I'm sure there are others that do. And I think too that lots of good information coming out from CHSP newsletters, from the Department of Health, National Cabinet, and you know, other peak bodies such as AXA and others. So there is lots of information around delivering in-care support. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Yeah. Okay. But I just, again, encourage, I think the COVID safe plans, very important, obviously, to have them done, spend a lot of time, you know, focused on that. It is a key priority for our organisation, is really thrashing those plans out and making sure that's real, you know, nothing more important at the moment than a COVID safe plan. So I encourage everyone to be doing that. With groups that, so there's a question here, with groups that contract vehicles from CTST, will we have to access the checklist for our drivers? So that's a very good question. I guess it really comes down to, again, who, so as CTST, when we take bookings, we have maximum numbers of passengers per vehicle. So on a sedan, it's maximum of 1, and a commuter, it's, we will go up to 4, but 3 is the target. We'll go to 4 if it's agreed amongst the group and depending on individuals who are on the vehicle and their own health and their own assessment. So if you think about 3 for commuter, 1 for sedan. So as an organisation, because we are making that booking, we're putting that consumer in that environment, and also the staff member or the driver, the volunteer, doesn't matter, in that environment. That's the position we have. Organisations that hire vehicles, they can make their own decisions about the risks they want to manage. So that wouldn't apply. We'd obviously be encouraging, you know, providers that are subcontracting to have those types of limits, but that would be their own decision. Okay, well, look, if there's no more questions, I'm happy to wait a bit. I know we've gone over time. It looks like most people are still with us. So probably one of the indicators will be as the attendance numbers drop off. That's probably a message to me that you've had enough. But if a question does come through, I'm prepared to stick around and answer that question. And of course, any questions that come to light after today's presentation, then of course we'll answer those as well, and through Suzanne. And Rita's made a comment there, which is great. There is a blood test, finger prick test, COVID-19 and antibodies, but can only tell you if you have it, not when. Okay. All right. Well, Suzanne, I think we're probably there, aren't we?
I think so, yes. Thank you.
So again, everyone, I do apologise for rushing, but just conscious of time. And if there's any more questions, happy to talk next session or sessions after about what we're doing, if there's any more questions that come up. And I think, as always, if you do have any questions or any concerns, please send them through to Suzanne. And from all that, that will determine the next lot of speakers. So that's really important.
Yes, so just to confirm, the next session will be in a fortnight from today, which will be alternate week than it usually is. But that also might open it up for a few people who have regular fortnightly meetings. If you have any thing that you would, any particular presentations or speakers you'd like to hear from, please let me know. That would be fantastic.
Great. Okay, thanks everyone, and well done to everyone. Everyone's doing a great job. Trying time. So again, anything support that the peak body can do, please send it through to Suzanne, and we'll do what we can to support you. Hope you all stay safe, and look forward to seeing and chatting with you all soon.